Welcome to our presentation, Beech Forest Management in Transformation Countries. The presentation is structured into 6 points. First, I will give you a little introduction into our research questions and the methods and material that we used. Then Mari will tell you something about the situation of European beech forests, followed by me, who will again talk to you about the strategic objectives, approaches, and the application of these. In the fourth point, Victoria will talk about socio-economic driven features. And in the fifth point, Phyllis will talk about monitoring and evaluation. And last but not least, we will of course give you our sources. The research questions are quite manifold and take many factors into account. These are just some of the research questions that we had, and if you want to read them, I recommend you to pause the video at this point. Methods and materials. We used open source collaboration and online communication tools. We used the adaptive cycle introduced by Professor Ibish and the diagnostic ecosystem analysis guide to have some kind of a guideline where we know where our presentation would be going for. We did also, of course, do some video research, library research, and internet research.
Okay, so from the map on the right side, we can see the situation of the climate all around Europe, the different types of climate. Whereas on the map of the left, we can see the beech forest distribution all over Europe. If we compare the two maps, we can clearly see that most of the beech forest grows in where there is continental climate. So let's go more in deep inside the characteristics of beech forest all around Europe. So some features of the beech forest in Europe. As we said, beech forest grows mostly where there is continental climate, and this tells a lot about beech forest itself because it's quite a flexible and adaptable type of forest, and it grows where there is a moderate amount of precipitation, cool winter and hot summer. It also grows in very different kinds of soils that can grow from acidic soils to basic soils. Here I put some examples like podsols, cambisols, luvisols, leptosols. We can see that without human interference, beech forest would probably cover more than 2/3 of the forest area in Central Europe. But instead, because of the human interference, the forest covers only 1/5. Mostly, beech forest is very dense and the canopy doesn't allow much light to go on the soil. And this creates mostly a forest where the beech is more present than all the other species. But when there are also other species, the ones that we can see the most is silver fir, maples, hornbeam, ash, oaks, Norway spruce, and lime. So Fagus sylvatica is a plant that reaches a height of 30-40 meters. In close stands, it has a diameter that can reach 100-150 centimeters and has a maximum age of 200 to 300 years, but there are some exceptional cases in which trees get also as old as 500 years old. It's an anisohydric species, which means that even though there's a drought, the plant keeps transpiring and it growing until the water runs out. Fagus sylvatica is the dominant tree species in Europe, and in the last ice age it survived thanks to its presence on the Alps, Carpathians, Pyrenees, and Mediterranean area. But after the ice age, from these areas, it multiplied again and covers all over Europe. Nowadays, there are only few forests that remain from that ice age, and they're nearly untouched. They are called primeval forests and they cover only 1% of the total area of European forest. Most of the remaining beech forests are managed for timber production. Here there are some ecosystem services of beech forest. They depend on the management type of the area, of course. Different management types offer different benefits for the environment and for the people that benefit from them. But for example, some of the most common effects of beech forest are the oasis effect, which is the regulation of the water cycle, prevention of erosion, and also regulation of the temperature. Since the soil is covered, the soil is more able to survive and not get eroded. Of course, since beech forest is still a forest, there is the CO2 stock and the provision of raw materials, for example, wood. It's a habitat for many different types of species, from fungi to animals and other types of plants. Beech forests are an ideal place for long walks and recreational and tourism purposes. Of course, also the forest, due to its diversity, it's a great place to maintain genetic diversity of plants.
Strategic objectives, approaches, and application. Strategic objectives. The first and most important objective must be to preserve and protect beech forests and their unique ecosystems they contain. Then it is important to enable nature consistently to provide ecosystem service, such as regulating services, provisioning services, cultural services, or supporting services. It is also important to bolster sustainable development in the region and, of course, to ensure people's well-being, because in these times or nowadays people decide how good forests are kept in shape. Approaches and application. First of all, it is really important to do research and monitoring, because you can only protect what you know. The same counts for environmental education. It is therefore important to apply different categories of protected areas. Some of them exclude humans from the land use, and some bolster humans to use the land in a sustainable way. To name some of these areas, types, there are national parks, nature reserves, landscape parks, UNESCO biosphere reserves, or for example World Heritage Sites, and many, many more. Beech forests as a pan-European heritage. The protection of rare beech forest complexes began in the 1970s with the establishment of Bieszczady National Park in Poland and the Eastern Carpathians Protected Landscape Area in Slovakia. In 1992, these two areas were designated a transboundary biosphere reserve within UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program. Along that, many other protected areas followed to go up. They are a brilliant possibility to protect still existing primeval forests. Without these primeval forests, it would probably not have been possible to protect the areas. Today's Eastern Transcarpathia represents a European epicenter for wilderness and autochthonous and functional forests. Having understood the importance of these beech forest networks of Europe, the UNESCO calls out a World Heritage Program for ancient and primeval beech forests of the Carpathians and other regions of Europe. Firstly, in 2007, only small parts, and then in 2017, even more have been nominated. Right now, there are efforts made by 10 countries striving currently for inscribing for being further component parts of the beech forests. Heritage. This heritage has been very important to bolster international cooperation and transboundary cooperation. They connect Europe as one continent and also improve collaboration.
Now we are going to have a look at the socio-economical factors of nature preservation. At first, we're going to look at the motivation for nature preservation, as it as well can be seen as a socio-economical factor. On one hand, we got here the intrinsic motivators as recreation, traditional dependency on local forests, or ecosystem services. And on the other hand, we got the extrinsic obstacles in nature preservation. For example, 152,000 people are working in the Ukrainian forestry sector and are depending on that income. Especially in the remote areas, the rate of illegal logging is higher than elsewhere and it's strongly connected to the unemployment rate. Reasons for that can be the opportunity to gain some income or covering the needed amount of wood for domestic usage. At that point, I will give you a short historical background. After the breakdown of the centrally planned USSR, followed plenty of structural changes in each transformational country separately. That development process took different forms and velocities in each of that countries. Although you could say there's a trend emerging, which is reaching out to development towards fully participation in market economy and Western Europe. Many countries of them are aiming to become a part of the EU, and others already achieved the integration, like Romania, Estonia, or Latvia. As I already mentioned, after 1981 there happened a lot of structural changes. We want to have a look at a few outcomes of that structural change. As economic growth caused by economic systematical change often comes along with natural resource exploitation, like in Central Europe during the industrialism as well, the intensified commercializing approach in forestry is getting visible in the share of the forestry sector in GDP 3-year average of 2009 to 2011. For example, in the Ukraine by 1.16%, in Romania by 1.74%, and in Belarus by even 2.11%. In that context, only forestry itself and forest industries are included in the term of forestry sector. When large forest areas got reprivatized after 1989, for example in Romania around 50% of total forest coverage by 2011, the rise of clear cuttings and exploitation of the legal logging frames and regulation took place, like sanitary felling, public use for personal and local needs for firewood example, due to the insecurity of the ownership and stability of new economical schemes, or achieving short-term profit, as well as the lack of education about sustainable management strategies or the necessity of it. Further consequences are a higher rate of illegal logging in private forests.
Monitoring and evaluation. In this section are included future scenarios, the conclusion of this video, and recommended actions. Future scenarios in terms of climate change. Looking at future challenges for the beech forest in terms of changing climatic conditions in Europe, including different CO2 content and air temperature, heat waves and drought episodes, it is to assume that the competitive tree species, which is well known for its wide-ranging climate amplitude and high tolerance level, will be able to adapt well compared to other species to the changing conditions. Even though the vitality and growth of beech trees, as well as their competitive ability, as presented in several reports, will not stay unaffected by the changing climate. Results from different studies brought an insight about realistic scenarios of the plant development and future distributions in Europe. Even if the beech forest will remain the most important natural forest in temperate Europe during this century, there will be a change in their growing pattern. According to this page will present some of its most contributing factors. Increase of photosynthesis. Many studies show a rise in photosynthesis and net primary productivity under elevated temperatures and higher CO2 concentrations. Drought stress decreases leaf biomass and photosynthesis, but because of less leaf biomass, conditions for radiations are improved, which again increases photosynthesis. Elongation of the growing season. While drought and heat stress are a huge mortality factor, higher temperatures can lead to an extended length of the growing season, which implies longer time for carbon fixation. An increased CO2 content can increase the biomass production of the beech stands in newly occupied areas. On the other side, would a high mortality diminish the productivity of a forest stand so that less photosynthetically active biomass would be produced. As mentioned before, is the beech as an anisohydric species continuing transpiring and growing in times of drought stress until water runs out. In this way, the trees secure a lower decrease rate of its growth, but is also taking the risk of losses of fine roots and leaves due to cavitation of the water-conducting pipes. Contribution to carbon storage. Less productivity implies a reduced leaf biomass in the following period, which will also lead to decreased transpiration. The decrease in productivity goes along with a reduction of the forest contribution to carbon storage. Productivity loss is closely linked with a reduction of fitness and cognitive strength in comparison with more drought stress tolerant species such as the oak. In terms of future distribution in Europe, a northeast shift of forest categories has already been observed for European forest species. This graphic is presenting two models of the 10 most dominant European forests. On the left side, we see their distribution in the year 2000. On the right side, we see a broadcast for the year 2100. Also, the geographical area of European beech will shift northwards. As the European beech tends to retreat in uplanded submontane landscapes, where the summer seasons will become drier in the future, it will have to reach higher altitudes in the mountains. This may break the dominance of the beech in some temperate European deciduous forests. Conclusion. As the effects of climate change could be mitigated, they won't be completely compensated. Therefore, it will be one of the future challenges to stabilize beech stand growth under changing climate conditions. The protection of Fagus sylvatica is also highly depending on the socio-economic dynamics of the country the species is located in. Countries with higher poverty levels tend to have a higher pressure for the personal needs, as well as higher dependency on the opportunity to derive income from illegal log timber. The corruption that is still taking place nowadays in high level in order to follow the economic interest of export timber products to the EU illustrates how security of livelihoods is still given more importance than the sustainable use of the forest. Formulating a clear scenario in this case for the beech is difficult as political framework conditions are constantly changing and evolving and differ strongly from each country to another. Nonetheless, first successes in the empowerment of environmental NGOs and the local community in Eastern Europe have been noticeable. Forum Lviv is reporting from an increased influence in the forest sector policy, which is from great necessity for the future of sustainable forest management. A desirable scenario, but if this trend would be continuing in the future. Another positive development process is the constant raise of awareness in the people's mind, as for example noticeable in Romania, when within 33 days 106,000 people signed a petition calling for all virgin forests to be placed under protection to stop fragmentation, illegal logging, invasive species, etc. Also, events have been taking place like the European Forest Week in Switzerland, organized to highlight the role of ecosystem conservation. Suitable development does not work without the involvement of local people. Coming now to our recommended actions. A support of local community would be a way to reduce pressure on ecosystems. This could be accomplished by providing local income alternatives, the availability of sufficient firewood, all forms of mobilizations that lead to sustainable use of natural resources like educational campaigns for local population, involvement of locals in decision-making. Another important point is an enhanced communication and collaboration. Forum meetings could be a platform to allow exchange between important stakeholders. Strengthening governmental structures by the existence of a clear framework and the development of action plans that are based on ecological values would be also desirable in the case of beech preservation, as well as in terms of monitoring of forest stand, a development of methods in forest inventory. And not to forget the increase of public awareness due to promotion of ecotourism and an improve in the recognition of protected areas. At this point, I would like to thank you all for your attention.